Hey guys, welcome to the Branch Podcast. Today I am joined by pastors Anthony and Chris, and we have a great discussion, and it's actually a little bit of a surprise because in the discussion, I didn't give them any questions ahead of time. And what we did is we talked about this previous Sunday's sermon, but then we also went into some of the controversial things of our culture over the last few weeks to give a little bit more insight because Sunday's message connected to it. So this is a great discussion. It's one you need to prepare your mind and heart for, but we hope it's an encouragement to you. And if it is, feel free to share it with family and friends because we want to get the truth out there. Thank you so much for joining us. So have you guys ever played a prank on someone that was good or had one played on you that was good?
Man, these questions are tough. The answer is yes, for sure. I think of one more recently. I don't know if you would even call this a prank. It would be more like I would characterize it as just scaring my children. I think I talked about this one other day. I don't know if it was on the podcast, but my boys, so for those who are listening, they're going to be 8 and 6, but they went outside. So a lot of times they'll end up leaving something in the car that later on they have to go get. And neither of them wanted to go down by themselves. So they decided to go down together. And so they go down our steps and there's a light outside of the garage, but it's still pretty dark around it. Well, I went out the other way, on our front deck, and I'm able to look down over at them. And I just basically growled. I made a growling noise. I did not anticipate the reaction. V was so physically, he literally was ah! And he grabbed, or I think Luca grabbed him, and they're holding on to each other. The best part about this is I got it on camera because we have a camera outside of our house that was awesome. Is motion activated. Yeah. So I looked back later and got the whole thing on camera, but they were absolutely terrified. And then I just felt bad.
Save that video. Man.
It was meant to be a joke, just right. Funny, but did not anticipate at all how terrified they actually were. And then looking back, I'm okay, they went, they're little kids, they're already kind of creeped out, which is why they went together. And then they hear this growling noise and they lost it.
I'll tell you, as a dad, that's a good dad move.
Oh, it was fun. It was fun. I
it's our job to do things like that. Yeah. Our humor as dads should be, we feel a little guilty.
Yeah. For sure.
That might be a little much, but
yeah. I'm really trying to pull my brain on, I've just have never been a big prank person.
Yeah, that's all right.
But people have pranked me before. I was talking about this in the office. There's the time that you put on the Joker mask and hid underneath the soundboard.
No way.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
That was actually, though, for volunteer appreciation. Yeah. We were trying to scare staff members as much as we could.
So
tough. I went into the auditorium, put on a mask, crawled under the sound booth and over to the side, and Chris came in and he hit me. He was not thrilled with it at all.
Yeah, that would be terrifying.
Being scared. Do you ever see that video of that guy that walks into a room and there's the toy alien sitting there and he just punches it?
Yeah.
That's my natural reaction when I get scared.
Just punch it.
But I watched a kid one time though in 8th grade. This was probably the funniest thing I've ever seen. So there's this kid 4'11", and the another kid who he had to be 6'2", 6'3". He was the biggest kid I've ever seen. This is 8th grade, and he was a huge kid. So this kid who's 4'11", I watched him walk through, and the other kid was standing up in front of the class talking. Mm-hmm. He walks by and just grabs that kid's pants and just yanks him down right in front of the class. So he's standing up there in his underwear pulled up, and then I watched that little kid get the snot kicked out of him in the hallway.
Oh no!
Yeah, he had to come in.
He had to come in. 100%.
That's tough.
I got a couple. I got one recent. My daughter Nora wants to scare me and has tried for years. I'm not a jumpy person by nature, so it's really hard to scare me. It's not that I can't be scared. I'm just not jumpy. So her stuff, I can hear her coming and all that kind of stuff. So recently I went downstairs and the lights were all out. I didn't know she was down there, and she jumped out, and it did it startled me as much as me going like that.
Yeah.
But that's as much as I've ever done. So she's like, "That's right." She's so excited. I got you.
Finally got you.
She just goes right then into her bathroom. She uses the main level bathroom as her own because she has 3 brothers and their bathroom's disgusting to her. So she goes in there, and I'm just thinking in my mind, what a dumb move. I'm going to go upstairs now and just scare her to death. So I go sprinting up the stairs, run down the hallway into her room, into her closet. And a few minutes later, I hear her come up. And I hear her talking to herself going I know you're going to scare me. I know you're going to scare me. And she's you're behind my door. And I'm not. And I can hear her walking in. And then I hear her walk back out. And then she's kind of talking to herself oh, I wonder where he is. That type of deal. She walks in the room. And I come out from the closet. I just go, rah! And she goes weak. I mean, it's that type of deal. And I was I just went down to my room. The funny thing about it though, I was getting ready for bed. At that point, my adrenaline spiked so much that hilarious. I was I laid down and I was I was just wide awake. I was oh. The other one real quick was in high school. Mary's best friend, who in high school, I didn't like Mary's friends. And so Mary and I dated in high school, and now she's my wife. But one of her friends somehow got a hold of my keys and took my car and parked in the middle of the soccer field. It was like the middle of the winter. It's like frozen, parked out there. To me, it was like a dumb prank. I didn't even actually bring my car in. Someone else told me about it, got my keys, brought my car back in. So it's just, is what it is. Later on that week, we went to like an off-campus lunch. We came back, and her best friend's car was a Volkswagen. I think it was called a Fox. It's this old, tiny, super light Volkswagen. And we had a bunch of guys that were coming in. And I was convinced we could pick the car up, and we were able to. And so going into our school by the gym was a long corridor with brick walls on both sides, probably at least 30 feet. And it was just the width of her car going this way.
No way.
So we got on both sides of her car out in the driveway, picked it up, walked it up there sideways. So it's facing the walls.
How many of you were able to pick this car
I think
up?
It was like 5 on one side, 5 on the other. Again, this is a tiny little old Volkswagen, tiny car, like felt like aluminum foil. I mean, it wasn't even hard. We just picked it up, and like we all like walked it down all the way to the very end by the doors, put it down, and went in. And she had to try to pull it out. And so she just had to go like 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch.
That's
like,
hilarious.
They said it took her like a couple hours to get it out. And I thought that'll teach you to prank.
Now that is a prank. That's
hilarious.
I love that.
All right. So for today's not a prank. So that question's not leading into something else. But today we are going to do something different than we've ever done before. So I'm actually going to speak first to the audience. One of the things that we highly value as a church, and for us three as pastors, so I'm joined with Pastor Anthony, Pastor Chris, and I'm Matthew, the lead pastor at the Tree.Church. One of the things that we highly value is having discussions of learning, of processing through things. And actually, this podcast came about because we naturally did this in the office. And people would listen and say, like, that was a really good discussion. You guys should think about doing that for a podcast. And that's where this came about. But with that, we have, I say this, it sounds like a self-serving thing. We have a humility about us in the sense that we're always trying to learn. We have a mindset that we could be wrong. We want to learn. We want to discuss. So for today's podcast, I did something different than we've ever done before. I actually did not give them any questions. I sent a text out yesterday just saying, hey, I'm going to go in a direction where I'm going to reference this past Sunday's message, but we're also going to transition and talk about some more controversial issues that are happening in our culture right now, specifically around politics and some things that we just went through as a nation. But the reason why I didn't tell them is I want to have a discussion. I want it to feel as free as it naturally does in our office. And here's what I'm saying is, if you're the type of person, and I mean this is going to sound in some ways, I think, more aggressive than I want it to be. But if you're the type of person that does not find value in hearing conversations, having your mind open, if you are really solidified in your perspective and you get frustrated when you hear something else, then I would just encourage you, this probably isn't the podcast for you. But if you want to just hear three people talking through stuff where we might say the right thing, we might say the wrong thing, we might kind of process through our own thoughts and raw emotion on stuff, then I want to show you how we can do this, because again, we're trying to model what I think is a healthy and even godly way to handle issues. So we're going to talk about our opinions. We're going to talk about what the Bible says about them, and we're going to discuss it. So we're going to begin by talking about this past Sunday's message, because it leads into the political discussion that's going to happen later. So guys, I didn't tell you the questions, and I said, trust me, and you do. And again, the good thing about this is it's a recording, and if we don't like it, we don't ever have to release it, right? So
that's true.
But let's talk about Sunday for a second. So this past Sunday, we were continuing in our series on following Jesus, and we got to what is oftentimes like kind of a famous passage of where it ends, where Jesus clears the temple, he flips tables and goes in. But before that is the triumphal entry. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people don't connect those stories, but they very much are placed there intentionally by Matthew to show, I think, a little bit of the conflict of the moment. How I began this past week was talking about, I think there's a tension in our understanding of how we view Jesus, in that in one way, we love the humility of Jesus. We love his compassionate side. We love the grace that he shows when we're talking about ourselves and those that we love. When we talk about people that we might classify as our enemies, people that are on the opposing side, I think we like an idea of a Jesus who flips tables. We like the Jesus who's aggressive. And so I use the imagery that we find in Scripture, which I know you love because you love Revelation, but the imagery in Revelation 5 where John looks up and he sees, there's a scroll that can't be opened, and then he's weeping, and the elder says, don't weep, because someone is worthy to open the scroll, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And what I was saying on Sunday is like the imagery of the lion. We love it. The power. I mean, that is what is being portrayed. Power. The king of the jungle, apex predator. But then when that is declared in our minds, we would think, okay, it literally says the Lion of Judah has conquered. He has overcome.
Yeah.
We go, oh, awesome. He overcame. He conquered. Like the imagery, it feels military. And then he looks and he sees a lamb who has been slain. And it's like that weird tension that we have in our faith of power, but power through sacrifice. And it's that weird tension inside of us. So you guys understand what I'm saying. So here's just, I'm going to throw the tough question out first is, when we hear that tendency, what is the tendency of modern day Christianity to prioritize? What's the tension that we try to navigate with that of the power side, but the sacrifice side? How does that play out even in how we treat people who think differently and act differently than us? I mean, what's your guys' perspective of that?
So like, as I listen to, and I've been trying to listen to more of the conversation going on around this, as far as like with the Charlie Kirk Memorial, all of those different types of things, because sometimes I have an idea of something, but I don't know what's actually being said. So I was listening to some of that today, and the language that kind of surrounds it creates that tension for me of where there is this idea of fighting, of declaring truth, of fighting for truth, of essentially winning for the side of truth. And so what I think happens in moments when we think about the whole idea of the lion and the lamb, I think we like the lion because it gives us an image of winning without I'm trying to think of how I want to say it. It lets us perceive winning in a way that we understand winning. The cross is so contradictory to the way in which we think about what really accomplishes things, what really is good for us and for our world. It's so like contradictory to the way in which the world works that oftentimes I'm not sure that we believe that way actually does something. Why? Because there is still evil. There is still, like, we have to live in the realities of that every single day. And so we constantly divert back to win over evil, we have to be stronger. To win over wrong, we have to be more right. And we have to have the power to be right. And Jesus comes along and says, no, you have to trust that my way will work. And I think that's how that tension kind of plays out for us, or how I see it, is that we come to a place where we just don't think that the way of Jesus actually accomplishes anything.
Yeah, it feels like we admire Jesus, right? In the sense that you're talking about, like his humility. We admire what Jesus is about, the fact that he was able to ask for forgiveness for those who were crucifying him, right? We talk about those things as if they're really noble and beautiful. And yet when we use rhetoric that talks about conquering evil or taking a stand for truth, like just the rhetoric that we oftentimes hear today, it feels very disjointed in the sense that we're on one side able to acknowledge those things about Jesus as being good, but simultaneously it doesn't feel like we are actually trying to embody that same type of behavior and mindset when it comes to dealing with issues of evil. And so, like, even thinking about this whole thing the last few weeks, some of the rhetoric we're hearing, like it's okay, there's people that are attacking Christians, right? And that's been true around the world for 2,000 years, right? That people have been attacking Christians. But I think the question that comes to mind is those who are angry, upset, or even the way that we handled the Charlie Kirk thing, they're upset or disappointed. And there was quite a few people. Part of my question in wrestling is, in your mind, what are we supposed to do? Like, what are we supposed to do with people who view things in a way that we feel like is distorted, or view things in a way that we think is evil? Because again, it goes back to that mindset of, we have to take this posture of power to overcome evil with the truth. But there's a practical question, I think, for me that I do wrestle with is, what are we are we thinking in military type mindset here? Again, as I call it, like the crusader mindset, like we're actually taking up swords, we're fighting in a physical battle, or are we still thinking about it in the way that Paul talks about in the Ephesians 6 way of, this is a spiritual battle, right? That our battle isn't against flesh and blood. These people aren't meant to be seen as enemies that we need to slaughter and defeat, but yet it feels like there's a disconnection at times when we hear this certain rhetoric being used. So I think for me, I don't think it's an answer as much as it's a question. I'm not exactly sure what people expect as far as like what the church is supposed to do to conquer evil. Like what do we do practically, or what are we supposed to do practically to actually conquer the evil? I think the answer is what you were saying. It is to actually embody the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
But I think that feels weak to people, and that feels powerless because of our entire framework of how we think.
But I think if you look at so I love the book of Revelation. You mentioned that. Like, I love it. This is what the play is throughout the entirety of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at times we hear, like, we love seeing Jesus on the white horse, the conquering Jesus. But again, and we get this idea that, okay, Jesus is going to come back and he's going to slaughter our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all this language of blood, but because I think it's Revelation 6 where it talks about like the martyrs that have been
Mm-hmm.
killed. And so the language that precedes all of this is that we should be vindicated.
Mm-hmm.
The truth that we know that God is in control and he's sovereign doesn't seem to be happening.
Yeah.
And so there's this tension that creates for us. We still see evil. We still see brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
For the martyrs who we see in Revelation 6, they were still slaughtered and killed for their faith. And so evil still has its sway, and yet the claim of the cross is that Christ has won the victory.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we hope and what we expect and what we think, because we're so accustomed to the power and might is what wins the day.
Mm-hmm. We
We even think that image of Jesus on the white horse is Jesus coming and killing all of our enemies. But the vindication doesn't even happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it, there's no battle scene. There's the illusion of a battle scene,
Right.
but there's no battle scene. And his robe's already dipped in blood when he gets there. The point being, it's his blood.
Mm-hmm.
And the sword that comes out of his mouth is his word.
Mm-hmm.
It's the double-edged sword of his the word of God.
Yeah.
And so what we see is that, like, we are called to conquer based on the blood of the Lamb
Mm-hmm.
and the word of his testimony, the word of our testimony, which is the word of God. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so, like, even in this imagery where you have this military might, you have all this, all of that conquering is done through the sacrifice that Jesus made,
Mm-hmm.
and his victory, that his word is true, and that he is, though it doesn't look like it,
Mm-hmm.
he is still Lord and sovereign. And so that's why you don't see John calling people to rise up in rebellion against Rome. You don't see John calling them to take arms.
Yeah.
It's stay faithful to Jesus, stay
Mhm.
faithful to the message. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have present day implications. It doesn't mean that it doesn't impact the world in which we live.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that as we see and feel this tension of evil versus the way of Jesus, we always choose the way of Jesus because that is what wins the day in the end.
Yeah, one of the things that I was so shocked after the Charlie Kirk situation is I made 2 or 3 posts online, and the first one I made was it was actually more of a general statement, not necessarily a spiritual statement, in the sense of, like, we don't have to be divided. We don't have to be manipulated by political parties, because at that point when I made the post, I didn't fully realize that Charlie Kirk was a Christian. But then after that, I made posts about being the example, being the light, by loving our enemies.
Mhm.
And I have to be honest, I was shocked at how many people pushed back on me, basically implying that I was compromising my role as a pastor by not calling people to arms. Not literal in the sense of pick up your gun and let's go revolt, but let's go attack the enemy. And there was that language. And I legitimately say this, I'm not shocked often, but I was shocked by how many self-professing Christians labeled, like, I was uncomfortable. Like, they used that term. I was uncomfortable with his post. I was uncomfortable. And I thought, man, like, none of my posts were unbiblical in any way, just the opposite. They were just so, like, saturated in scripture. And I was shocked by that. But it's because they do have a mindset, as we were talking about, of true Christianity is fighting against evil.
Yeah.
So here's the question I want to pose to you guys. And what does that actually look like to resist evil? What does it look like to fight against evil? Because that is the tension of the lion and the lamb. Is in our minds we go, oh yeah, we know how to fight. We've seen fighting. We see fighting in a physical sense. We see boxing and MMA. We see battles. And we have movies about this. But what does it look like for a Christian to fight against evil? Because I think for some, they wonder, like, is the promoting of loving your enemy, is that actually a compromise of our calling as Christians? And I think some read it that way. And some would even say, like, you're afraid to stand up against culture. And in my mind, I was like, man, I can't express to you how not afraid I am.
Yeah.
And yet it's coming across that way. And it's like, so my question to you guys is, what does it look like then for us as Christians to resist evil, but not in a way that's aggressive? Well, how do we model Christ in that?
Yeah, it's funny because a couple weeks ago we talked about Romans 12, right? That idea of do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil by doing good, right? And so I think it's even there, like even the verse preceding it, where he talks about like if your enemy, like basically take care of your enemy, love them, and it'll, in so doing, it will heap burning coals on their head. And so he basically gives the answer there. It's to do what is unexpected, to do what is not normal and what is not natural and what is not normally seen in culture, which is to do exactly what you're saying. Like the person, I mean, this is Jesus 101, right? Sermon on the Mount, like the idea of loving your enemies, praying for those who persecute you. Jesus literally lays it out, and everything he's saying is countercultural and unnatural, which is why it should be sobering to us. Like you're talking about people that commented, like it should be sobering to us to realize what you're saying is exactly what the world does, like how you're acting, how you're thinking of these people. And this is also what the enemy wants. He wants he wants us to be fueled by hatred. He wants us to be fueled by anger. He wants us to villainize and vilify people, as we've talked about before, so that we don't see them as a human being made in the image of God, but that we would see them as somebody that needs to be conquered and defeated, because then that actually takes the focus off of the real problem, which is a spiritual problem. And so again, going back to people being deceived, right? People being held captive and blinded by the powers of darkness, the power of Satan. So I think we have to just understand, like there's a theological sense in which we really do need to understand what is actually happening, like behind the veil, because unless we see that, unless we recognize that, I think we get stuck in that mindset of we're in the flesh. And so we view people who say evil things or do evil things, we turn them into monsters, into villains, so that they no longer are human beings, so that we don't have to love them. And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So I think it is doing what is countercultural. It's doing what is unnatural. It's seeking to do good. It's the person who is arguing, it looks like listening. Like I'm trying to listen, I'm trying to understand. The person who doesn't deserve love, it means looking at ways that I can show them love. Like it is the way of Jesus, in that we are taking the brunt of what others have done. So you think about Jesus, think about the sacrifice, right? Jesus takes our sin. He absorbs our sin. He takes upon himself the evil of this world, and through that transforms it through self-sacrifice into redemption. Like that is the call of human beings as Christians. That is our call, is to take what is evil in the world and transform it through love and through self-sacrifice, because that's what Jesus did. And I think the practical side is it differs on the context, right? Depending on what's happening, on who it is, what's going on, it's going to look different. But again, it's always stopping and asking, like, how does Jesus model for us what it looks like to love our enemies, and what it looks like to overcome evil, not with evil or be overcome by evil, but to overcome evil with good?
Yeah, and I think too, there is a level of a prophetic voice that the church is called to have. I think we are called to call evil things evil, and we're called to speak to when we see evil in society. And so I think that we have to watch how we do that, and I think we have to be hyper purposed around the ways in which the influence with which we're given.
Sure.
I think that's a big aspect of it. If you don't have it, everybody has influence now on social media, but not everybody has formed or put the thought to the way that it deserves, and communicated in a way that's clear and well. I think of like Martin Luther King Jr. And this is like, he should have spoken against like Jim Crow laws. He should have spoken against these things that were oppressive to a people in our society, and it was evil things. You know what I'm saying? And so he was given influence in a national level to speak prophetically against that sin. And so not everybody was. You could side with him, you could march with him. You had ways of standing up and resisting that evil without it being an unloving thing, without it being a damaging thing. And there's always offense when it comes to truth, but you have to make sure that it's for truth and for goodness, not just for winning on your side, like if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when people hear these scriptures, so obviously with Jesus and his time, a little bit after with Paul, and then at about the same time with Peter, I think sometimes people think, well, it wasn't as bad as it is now, right? But what was actually going on? So like in Romans chapter 12, what was going on in that culture? Who was the powers that be? Who were the enemies?
Sure. So you're looking at Christians were rejected first and foremost by what would have been their brethren, which was the Jewish leaders. So they were persecuted. They were kicked out of synagogues. They were some of them were beaten. Some of them were imprisoned. If they raised the ire of Rome was pretty. They were lenient until they weren't, and so Rome wanted just to keep the peace. And if you caused problems, which is why you see Paul oftentimes like, hey, live peaceably with all. Don't create more problems than you need. But because of the tension with the Jewish leaders, oftentimes that created tension with the Romans. And so this is Paul's story. You know what I mean? So, but they're going to prison. They're being crucified. Christians have been persecuted from pretty much day one. But not to because there's a lot of scholars out there that's like, it's not to the grand scale that we think that every Christian that lived was thrown in prison. That wasn't the case. But there was persecution, and there was trials, and there was hardship. They were a marginal community in a much larger society. And so
and I think that's important because I think, and we've maybe talked a little bit about this before, but I think particularly Christians in America, they lose sight of that because we've come out of a background in which Christians came from a place of power and privilege in this country, right? Like both, I would say culturally and in a lot of ways, even politically. And so I think what's happening is you're seeing people become aware that has shifted in culture, and it feels like we're grasping at ways to get power back.
Yes.
And I think that puts us in a very, very slippery slope, especially when we don't understand like what you just said, Chris, that like the Roman Empire under Nero and Domitian, like basically back to back, like they hated Christians, and there was intense persecution. And even to this day around the world, places where Christianity is illegal, and so yes, have there been attacks on churches? Absolutely. Those are abhorrent. They're evil. They should be acknowledged as evil. But I think a lot of times we try to to shift this perspective to where it's like something really bad is happening. Christians are losing power. We need to get back in control. And I think there's a lot of that I think is just misinformed, not only to history, how Christians have always operated, but even again, what our calling really is as Christians. Now, I know there are people that would say like, well, aren't Christians supposed to use their influence for good? It's like, yeah, if you're a person who's in politics, if you're a congressman or woman, like, yes, you should use every influence and opportunity God has given you to do good. But I think the problem is our entire framework. If we think as Christians that our job is to be in power and in control, then again, I think we go back to a different mindset that isn't actually the way of Jesus, because the way of Jesus is countercultural. And so it's not, we're going to impose everything on everyone else, our way of doing things, but rather through love, through selflessness and sacrifice and humility in the lives that we live and the way that we treat people, that we turn the world upside down. Why? Because that's what the early Christians did. That's how the Roman Empire was turned upside down. Not because Christians were getting into the Senate and they were getting into positions of power. It actually was from the inside out, a grassroots movement, if you will, because Christians were doing things that nobody else was. Babies that were being thrown away, they were taking them, raising orphans. When people were sick and everyone was fleeing the plagues, it was Christians who were taking care of them. And so they lived in such a way that was so attractive and yet so alien to a world that was far from God, right? And so I think that same calling is for us today.
I was just going to say, like going back to even like what I was talking about with being prophetic, that is being prophetic.
Yes.
When we live lives that embody the countercultural ideas of Jesus, we are being prophetic in a culture, not by being hateful, not by asserting our way, but by demonstrating a different way of living. And I think even that plays into like how we think about this. By loving the way that we do, we are showing a different way. We're pointing to the kingdom of God and being signposts to that there can be, though the world looks differently now, there can be a different way in which we operate. There can be life found when we operate in relationship with God.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So on Sunday, Jesus comes in riding in humility, comes on a donkey, fulfilling a prophecy of Zechariah, but he's coming in purposely making a statement. He doesn't come in on a stallion. He's not coming in on a chariot. The people in that moment, I think they really didn't fully understand what was taking place. I think there was genuine worship, but it was also genuine worship happening from a misconception. Mm-hmm. They were praising him as a king. So they responded in the way that they would a king. They're taking their cloaks off, they put them on the ground, they're taking branches, put them on the ground. They're quoting Psalm 118 to him, which was a messianic prophecy that was sung at the time of Passover. They even saying Hosanna, which means God save us. And they're declaring him as king because in their mind, he's coming in and he's going to conquer Rome. At some point, in some way, he's going to conquer Rome. And they really did have that as their conviction because of all the prophetic words. I would think what do you guys think? It's safe to say that no one on earth understood what Jesus was about to do. You know what I mean? Like it may be a prophet that we just don't know about, but like no one understood that he was going to be the lamb who was slain. They were all thinking lion, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so they were in their minds, from the typical Israelite perspective, their greatest threat toward having the full life that God had called them to was Rome. Mm-hmm. Rome needed to be conquered. All right, so this is where we kind of get into the let's just be real moments. Mm-hmm. When we look at modern day America, modern day Christianity, what's our Rome? What's the Rome that we think if only this would happen, then we can truly embrace the full life that God has for us?
Well, interestingly enough, I think in a lot of ways, I know Chris has thought a lot about this too. And when you read on Revelation, and even there's some podcasts on it, but that in a lot of ways, America is similar to Rome in that it really is an empire, right? In the sense of the way that we think about things. Mm-hmm. I think people forget that at the end of the day, like our nation is concerned with national interests, right? So the things that we do around the world, America has done a ton of good, but a lot of what is being done is for the good of our country and the power that we have, and even power plays, right? But I think, again, the way that we oftentimes view that is we either view America as kind of the superhero, like America is going to save the day, or again, more specifically and personally, I think with what we're talking about politically, to save America, which is kind of the other way of thinking about this now, like America is at stake here. And to save America, it's actually going to happen through voting, right? It's going to happen through political stuff like legislation, bills that get passed, things that get overturned. Like that's the way that we think about that. And I do think there's a complexity to this. Like just as I'm thinking out loud, there is a complexity to this. And we've talked about it before because Christians are afforded in this country, as everyone is, the right to vote. And so we should have the right to vote, and we should be able to do that and have a say. And we should always try to exercise, as we were saying, any influence that we have for the good of human beings, right? Because God desires human flourishing. He desires societies to flourish the way that he created us to work. And so I think there's a part of that where I understand, I sympathize with that. But I think what we get confused in is really like, what is the role of the church, and where is the divorce? How do we think about the church as an entity versus the state? And what is the role of the state, and what is the role of the church? And I think a lot of times for many people, we blur those lines too much to the point that we actually misunderstand what the purpose of the church is. And so I think it can get very confusing and difficult for people. But I think that we always have to remember that the church is the unique vehicle that God has placed in the world, through our worship, through our witness, that we are proclaiming a coming kingdom, a kingdom that is here and yet is not fully here. And we are the embodiment of that in the way that we worship, in the way that we live our lives, in the way that we love one another. I mean, even as a community of love, like Jesus says, this idea, right, that they will know you are my disciples by your love for one another. So like all of this is meant to be a witness to the world, to see that there is something else. There's a reality that is different. So I think the idea of a Rome, I don't know if you meant that in the sense of like a negative thing or a positive thing, but I think it can be both in the sense of the way that we think about the dynamics of power, the way that we think about control, and ultimately, like I said, the way that we think about what the church's job is or what our role is as Christians in the world.
I would say like thinking about it in a way of like, where do we compromise for the sake of our benefit? And here's what I mean by that. At some point in some place, we're going to have to decide whether Jesus gets our allegiance or America gets our allegiance. We're going to have to decide whether our comfort gets our allegiance or Jesus gets our allegiance. We're going to have to decide whether our preference gets our allegiance.
Our political party.
Right, or our political party gets our allegiance. Because in the end, none of them line up perfectly with the and it's because Jesus is so expansive.
Right.
None of them line up fully with what Jesus claimed that he came to do and who Jesus claimed to be. Because for one, he alone demands our he alone demands our allegiance. And then again, it's so expansive and it's so in taking in things that are broader than national borders. So I was even thinking about the idea of the picture of heaven, and like the picture of heaven, it's not that there's an American section and then there's like all these other different nationalities. It's that there are all people from every tribe and every race. They are all our brothers and sisters now.
Yeah.
And so like we at some point have to drop the American identity marker, because in a broader scheme of things, though we are American, like all I'm saying is that like
you're right. Go ahead.
We're invited into something bigger and more beautiful than just being American people. And so there's all of that with it. But going back to the compromise thing, I really think that we mix our motives at times, and I think we have to be super careful about how we think about the things that we want and we desire from our country. We have amazing what we would call blessings in our country. We have the freedom to say we can talk about this and not be fearful that somebody's going to walk through the door and take us to prison right now. We have amazing economic prosperity. We have amazing conveniences that are at our fingertips. And some of the world does not have that. We see those things as blessings, but they're also touch points for our compromise. And so when those things begin to take precedent over allegiance to Jesus, like we have to be careful, and we have to be careful that we're not mixing those things in our hearts and in our minds, because it happens really easily. This is, again, I keep going back to it, but we started talking about, but Revelation, there's two things. There's the evil of like sexual immorality and idolatry, which a lot of other people get accused of in the book of Revelation, but in the church there is the sin of compromise, and it's selling your allegiance to someone else for what's good and what's beneficial to you. And it might be easier to do that. It's easier to live in a country where we have all these freedoms and Christianity is a majority, like you said, and it's harder to do that when it's a minority. And there's more cost to it. And so we just have to watch where those places that could be pinch points where Jesus diverges from the thing that we think should be. And so we have to be open and willing to listen to other Christians. We have to remember, America is not the only Christian nation in the world. As a matter of fact, we are probably one of the smaller Christian nations now. And so like you look at the global South, and that includes like Asia, Africa, Latin America. The church is booming and growing. They don't have the same blessings that we have, and the church thrives and it is flourishing. They view things differently than us at times. So is American Christianity the right Christianity? I don't know. You know what I mean? So like, I think we have to be willing and open to hear what our brothers and sisters in Africa say, and what our brothers and sisters in China say, and what our brothers and sisters in South America say, so that we have a better understanding of the fullness of the picture of the gospel and what God wants to do in our lot in this world.
Yeah, no, what you're talking about is really like what the Bible called double-mindedness, or we might call it an idolatrous attachment, right? Like it's the Jesus plus. So we add Jesus to things, we sprinkle Jesus into things.
And that was basically my question about Rome, is like, what's the plus? What's the Jesus plus?
Yeah, so I think, nationalism is one of them. I think we have to be super, I mean, you were just really hitting at this, and you even quoting Revelation, like this idea that At the end of the day, we are Christian first, not American first. And I think that's really hard for a lot of people because patriotism runs deep in America, but there is a fine line between patriotism and nationalism. And nationalism is an idolatrous attachment. It's to say that being American is the most important thing about me, just in the same way as being black or being white is the most important thing, or being Republican or being Democrat is the most important thing. We would say from a Christian worldview, no, your identity first and foremost is that you are an image bearer of God, but also a child of God if you're in Christ. Like your relationship to him matters more than anything else. And so the brother or sister in Africa, or from specifically Nigeria or Botswana or wherever, who's a Christian is actually closer to you than your next door neighbor who's an American and looks like you and votes like you, but isn't a Christian.
Right.
But I think we don't think that way. So I think like what you're saying is exactly right. It is compromise in the sense that oftentimes we want both. And so the way that we get both is by stamping Jesus on the things that we attach ourselves to, because then we can justify it. And in reality, what you're saying is exactly right in that there is a cost to being Christian. It means at times the way that we want to do things, the way that we want to vote, the way that we view certain people, or all of those things become at some point a crossroads where it conflicts to our allegiance to Jesus, and we have to make that decision. So I think it is important for people to recognize that there are some things where, if you vote for this political party, there are things that align with, I think, the heart of God, right? But again, we have to be super careful of the underlying motivations for some of these things, that we want what we want for lots of different reasons and motivations. And when we Christianize that, we run the risk of not only idolatry, but also I think really demeaning the name of Christ, right? And the reputation of Jesus in the world.
I was going to say too, like if you look at the exit polls, this was from a couple years ago, you would have in the same breath someone who said that they're voting like a Christian conscience, So you have certain issues like abortion, you have issues like marriage rights and what's legal for family and marriage. Somebody who votes that, but then you look at the exit polls and you look at like, what is the number one reason or number one thing that determines your vote? It's always economics. What is economics? It's the level of comfort and life and blessing that we feel like we have. And so what we really, the underlying motive is we want a good economy. We want to live comfortably. We want to be safe and secure, which are not bad things. You know what I'm saying? But do we do that at the sake of our allegiance to Jesus? And I think that's, like you said, like you hit the nail on the head. I think that's where we have to be willing to be honest with ourselves and say, this doesn't line up. We have to be willing to say it doesn't.
What's the Tim Keller quote that you use every once in a while where you take something to make it a God? It's a good thing, but...
like our heart is an idol factory, or are you talking about making it an ultimate?
Ultimate,
that's making it the ultimate thing.
Taking a good thing, making it the ultimate thing, and that's, I agree. All right, so we got to move on just because we're going to get to more controversial stuff here in a minute. So you guys are
more
just
controversial. We're not already controversial enough.
So the people, I mean, they wanted. If you think about it, they wanted Rome conquered, and if you would go back 2,000 years, you would have a hard time arguing with their logic. You would say, they would say, our lives will be better if Rome got conquered and we became the power that we once were, like King David and Solomon. And so like from their perspective, I mean, even to the point you see the crowds have such a deep conviction of that, where it leads to sin, where Jesus, once he's arrested and Pilate gives the opportunity for him to be released, you see their hearts go toward Barabbas, the man who was militant. Jesus wasn't militant. They want Barabbas released so that, because he more aligned with what their values were. And you think about that, I think that's my fear of modern day Christianity is when it comes to politics, is they would say on one hand, we want Jesus, we want God. And then when push comes to shove, they go, oh, wait a second. But Jesus isn't going to do what we want.
Give us Barabbas.
Give us Barabbas, right? Give us this alternate party because it more aligns with my economy. This more aligns with how I want to treat my enemy. And so we compromise. And so in the story that we looked at Sunday, Jesus, instead of conquering Rome, he goes and he flips tables in the temple. And what I pointed out was he was not flipping tables in a place of unbelievers. He wasn't going into the tax collectors' houses, and he wasn't going into the other temples and flipping tables. And this passage of scripture is so often misused. But what Jesus was doing was he was attacking the compromised worship. He was attacking the hypocrisy, really the theft. I mean, call him the den of robbers. He was challenging people who claim to be followers because he's defensive for his Father's house, but he also is defensive of their hearts. He wants them to turn to authentic worship. Okay, so when we look at this, I'm going to make a statement, and then I want us to discuss. And this is where it's going to get a tad bit more controversial. I think there is something very, very dangerous about us connecting to a political party. And here's where I find it dangerous. So like, again, I'm going to make some statements now, and you guys can push back, or you can agree, or you can stay silent, whatever you guys would like to do. Over the last few weeks, coming out of that whole situation with Charlie Kirk's murder, which we all agree was evil, should not have happened. 100%. Charlie Kirk, from all that you can tell, was an authentic believer in Jesus. No one's questioning that. But from that situation, from my perspective as a pastor, there was a whole lot of idolatry going on within the Christian community. There was a worship of party. There was a worship of people. There was a mindset. And when there was almost a nervousness to even address it because of the rage that was connected to it, where it's like, man, I just wish people could take a step back. I mean, so now, we've given it a couple of weeks. The reason why I'm so bold right now to push back on it is because we care for our people. We care for the people listening, to say, we need leaders that will challenge us and point out when there's something broken in our lives. I was talking to a pastor friend of mine yesterday, and he was acknowledging, he said, one of the realities is we might have people's attention on Sunday for 30, 40 minutes, but they're getting a lot of their influence through social media, through Reels, through YouTube, the parties that they're connecting to and listening to. And my response to him was, that's why I'm being intentional to make my voice louder and clearer. And for us as a church, is because I don't want to give in to that. As pastors, I want to push back. And so I witnessed a lot of idolatry where people were, some of the things that people literally said to us, we had this incredible moment where 34 people got saved in both of our campuses. And there were people that said, if you would have mentioned Charlie Kirk, can you imagine how many more would have been saved? And I was just so shocked by a statement like that, where I thought, I can't even believe I'm engaging this. I had another person say, and they said this as a fact, all 34 that were saved because of Charlie Kirk's death. And I was like, what? Yeah. What are we talking about, right? Yeah. But for me, the danger of being connected to a political party is this, is you then, when you connect these two messages, there's no way to separate them. And all of what one party says is not good. Yes. No matter what party you look at, all of it is not good. And that's the danger of it, is when you connect these two things and saying, these are our hope, I think you cheapen the message of Jesus, and you attach it to something which makes an unnecessary controversy for people who are trying to find Jesus. And when you put these two together, I think the politics side of it, to me, it lessens the value of Jesus' message. What's your guys' thoughts on that?
No, I 100% agree with everything you just said. I think one of the other things too, when we attach Jesus to a political party, it no longer allows us to criticize from the inside, right? So if it's Jesus and being Republican, if it's Jesus and being Democrat, then we actually are not allowed, we're not able. And I've seen this a lot with people, like they're not able to actually acknowledge some of the areas that don't represent Jesus. So it feels very much like an all or nothing. And the problem with that is like, it's Jesus alone, right? It's not Jesus plus being Republican, Jesus plus being Democrat. And it's only him who gets to set the standard. And so if I'm aligned to Jesus and giving my allegiance to him, I can vote any particular way and say, I'm voting for these things because of these reasons, but I also don't agree with these things, right? And I can criticize this and I can call these things out because it gives me the freedom to do that, because my identity and attachment isn't primarily to a party, it's to Jesus. And I think we have to be honest about that. But I do think that the biggest tendency is that it creates barriers to people. And anytime we are creating barriers for people to get to Jesus, or the way that they see and understand Jesus, like not only is it idolatry, but we're actually like, we're creating a false Jesus. We're creating a different image of him. And so not only is it we are having an idolatrous attachment ourselves, but we're actually creating a fake Jesus that we're trying to sell people or saying that we need. And that is what is incredibly scary when you think about it that way.
Yeah, it's so dangerous. I love that imagery. Is we've created something that's not real and told people basically now worship this. And it's less than Jesus. It's not as good as Jesus. We don't improve Jesus by attaching him to a political party.
Absolutely.
So if you look at Israel's history, and this is devastating, 3 times the temple's been built, 3 times the temple's been destroyed for that exact reason. And we lose sight of that story because the New Testament doesn't take us to that point in history. But Jesus does something that is prophetic in flipping the tables. He does something that lets them know, like, this is what God thinks of your worship. They're still worshiping. They're still doing the acts. They're still bearing the name, but they're not doing it in the way that God called them to. And what that leads to is in 70 AD, because they chose Barabbas, there was an uprising, and not Barabbas specifically, but the concept of Barabbas. There was an uprising, and Rome comes in and destroys the temple. After Babylon destroyed the temple, after the Greeks destroyed the temple. And so you get this constant ongoing thing of, and specifically stemming out of the prophets who were around and who were prophesying in that time. It's this idea of we can worship God in the way we want to. We can do the thing. We can slap the name of God on top of the things that we want to do while neglecting the things that he really tells us to do, and then call it for our sake Christianity. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's just, God says from the get-go, like, you're going to bear my name. You're going to look like me. You're going to think like me. You're going to act like me. You're going to love like me. And what's beautiful is he's patient with us as we try to figure that out. But if we ever compromise that and we ever become comfortable with that not being what we're striving after, that becomes very problematic. And that's where you get these pictures of Jesus flipping tables, and you get these remembrances of temples being destroyed because they wanted the thing they labeled, not the real thing.
Right.
And so that, I think that is the prophetic call even right now, is to look and go, man, what ways are we not being objective and looking at our own sin and the own brokenness and the way that we're handling things, instead of, look, we've got to stop the enemy so that we can do this in the Christian name.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point about the physical temple of Israel. When you look back throughout the different kings, there were kings that literally began to put inside the temple statues of other gods. So it was the God of the scriptures plus all the other gods that they were adding. There was one king who actually saw an altar of another kingdom, thought it was so beautiful and so majestic. He had someone go and draw it, come and build it, and replace what was taking place in the temple. But from their perspective, they were fine with God because he was one of the gods they were worshiping.
Yeah.
So they were treating him as like, what are you upset about? We're doing your thing. But they were also doing these other things. And it's like what you were saying, to the nation, they're saying, continue to worship this version of God. Yeah. Worship this version. And there was no power. His presence, like, they didn't even recognize that the presence of God had literally left that temple. Yeah. And they're no longer protected by him or guided by him.
Well, even if you look at the prophets, there's not only is there idol worship, but there's a neglect for the poor. There's a neglect for the needy, for the sojourner. Like that language, you fail to do justice for the widow. You fail to do justice for the poor. Like, that language stems right in there with idol worship. And so like, there's all of this that's going on that they're not loving the way that God called them to. They're not worshiping the way that God called them to. And yet they still wanted the name and still wanted the label.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, I think it really shows it's like a deficiency in our understanding of the gospel. I mean, as you were talking about, just alluding to like the idea that more people would have been saved had you talked about Charlie Kirk. And there's a part of me that just asked the question, like, what did you think needed to happen for more people to get saved? Like talking about Charlie Kirk somehow was going to do what in a person's heart. And I think there's that same illusion, even when it comes to politics as a whole, that voting a certain way or having a certain policy, like that's going to somehow change people's hearts. That's going to, and it's like our understanding of the gospel is so deficient, because it's like, if we believe that it's through the crucified Savior and it's through the Holy Spirit that changes people's lives inwardly, like the outward stuff is symptomatic of the inward problem. And so I think a lot of times what we're trying to do, we might call it like sin management. We're trying to address the external issues without actually getting to the heart of what really needs to happen for us to see genuine change, which is why I brought up even earlier, like the Roman Empire wasn't conquered from the top down in the sense that Christians didn't, rally a bunch of people for a coup and then take over politically with the power that comes from the world, but through their service and sacrifice and their love and the way that they exhibited the behaviors that Christ himself showed us, that is actually what produced the real change that eventually had massive ripple effects. And so I do think there's a part of that we have to confront, like, what is it that we really want? Is it that we want the politics and the policies to be the thing that's convenient for us? Or is it, do we actually want to see people come to know Jesus?
Yeah.
Because then I think you can even get into, like, how does that actually happen? What does the Bible actually teach us about that? It certainly isn't through the kings and powers of this world that people are being saved. Because
here's what happened throughout all of that time, and that with temples being destroyed, the remnant of God, the people of God still persisted. And God, you know what I mean? And so, like, the same thing today. If God forbid that something happened in this nation that made it extremely difficult, like even illegal to be a Christian, the Church of Jesus Christ would flourish and would still continue. Why? Because God's way works, and he's faithful to his people, and he will protect, he will vindicate, and he will continue to move whether we have the comforts and conveniences or we don't.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about something a little bit more practical concerning this, but it's not. I'm not intentionally just trying to be controversial. So again, most of the people that watch and engage this, they know we have like relational history, and they know our hearts. But I want to talk about something specific because I want to give a little bit more context for this. The people who did want us to address Charlie Kirk's situation more, and none of our discussion is throwing shade at him in any way, but they wanted us to discuss it more. They wanted us to connect to it. They wanted us to celebrate him more, to speak about him more. I don't think a lot of them realize the tension that is surrounding him and his message, because his message was primarily a political message. He was a Christian. He was unashamed about his Christianity. But I think if you're being real and you go and you watch his stuff online, the vast majority of it is strictly political, with maybe occasionally mentioning Christianity, but it was political. And he was unapologetic about it. He was not trying to hide that. And I think for people to understand that his message was not received the same way by all Christians. Right. Because, on one hand, there's some things that are more consistently embraced by Christians, like pro-life. And he was very, very strong pro-life, like I am. I would say to the ultimate level. Again, that's how I view it too. But then also he was anti having immigrants, illegal immigrants, as he would word it, here in the country. And there were a lot of Christians that struggled with that because, again, it's like the idea of helping those in need, those that are poor. And people would go, well, they're illegal. And I would say, well, here, pause for a second. And again, I want to speak about this just to help people understand. If abortion was legalized, it would not change any of our views of it. We wouldn't go, well, it's legalized, therefore there's nothing we can do. We would still fight against it. The fact that someone is here illegally, even if they did break the law to be here, they're still a person made in the image of God, and there's value there.
And possibly need help.
And so Charlie's position and the Republican position as a whole of let's get all of these people out immediately without respect, let's arrest them, let's call them criminals. There were a lot of Christians that struggled with that and non-Christians. And so that was a part that was connected to him. And for us as a church, again, we weren't even making a statement on it, but what we were saying is this is why we're not connecting ourselves to a political party, because every single political party has topics like that for us, we go, this just creates an unnecessary hurdle that we have to try to connect to and explain and where we agree, where we don't. And we don't want to, because we value people. And we don't value political parties as the world does.
And I think you can agree with someone and you can honor them without having to put them forth as a hero. I'm working on an email right now to someone who very respectfully emailed in, had some questions, shared some perspectives. And I just had this thought about it of like, because I'm still wrestling through myself, like, how do you honor somebody knowing that not everybody agreed with what they said? How do you honor the good parts, the parts that, you know what I mean? And honestly, let them be the good for what they are, but also the broken for what they are. Because this is all of humanity. We are a mixed bag. There is not one person outside of the person of Jesus Christ who deserves only worship. Worship. I use that word lightly. You know what I mean?
Right.
Honorarium, honoring them.
Yeah.
And there's no person that deserves entire cursing. You know what I'm saying? We are a mixed bag of both good and evil in ourselves. And so I was going to use the example of C.S. Lewis. The more I love C.S. Lewis, I think like his thought.
Seriously?
Yeah. Sorry.
Love it.
It's the first I'm hearing of this.
Yeah.
Shocker. But like my thought to this person is like, I love them, but the more I've learned about their life, the more problematic his life became to me. There are a lot of things of C.S. Lewis's life that I look at and I go, well, that doesn't represent what what I would put forth as good or right. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I still would honor him. I still would think well of him. And I think he is probably one of the best Christian philosophers, thinkers in the 20th century. But at the same time, I'm also very aware that he was not a perfect man. And I would not put him on hero status. You know what I mean? As much as
And I would say that over every church father.
Yeah, every church father.
Right? I mean, Augustine. Martin Luther. I mean, there's stuff that you read about him and you're like, ugh.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
I agree.
100%. So...
Yeah. Okay. Another question then. And again, these are just more topics to help people kind of process through this. Did you guys watch his memorial, Charlie Kirk's memorial?
I watched President Trump's message in it.
Okay.
And yeah, I just saw some clips.
Some clips. And I watched parts of it too. One of the things that was interesting after the fact was, and again, I only want to speak about this to help people's minds open up. So I'm just prefacing that with everyone. On one side of it, you had a Christian response that was the most incredible thing ever on TV, right? Because the gospel message was shared over and over. But also in that was mixed some really strange things that I think as Christians we need to understand so that we can have a healthy perspective on this. And what I mean by this is after it happened, I was just curious to what the world's response would be. And so I intentionally sought out videos of people giving their thoughts and critique of it. And then I made sure like I was basically like engaging them and liking them to change my algorithm to get more of them because I really was fascinated from the world's response. And it actually confirmed what I suspected would happen. A lot of people found it very strange because they couldn't understand exactly what was going on. So on one hand, you had the gospel message clearly presented. I thought Secretary of State Rubio, I thought did a great job. I mean, it was like if you just took that clip, we could show it in our church in the sense of like that was solid. Carson,
Tucker Carlson.
Carson. He, who is a very controversial figure, called people to repentance in a very powerful way. So if you didn't know anything about him and you just took that clip, you're like, oh wow, that was incredible. Okay. But then you had Stephen Miller who gets up, who's the deputy chief of staff, gets up and is using language that we were talking about earlier of conquering our enemies. We will have victory. You have resurrected us. Like it was very militant language. Okay. President Trump gets up. So Erica Kirk gets up, has this incredible moment where she forgives her husband's killer. Again, that doesn't make sense apart from the gospel. Like you hear that and you think that doesn't make sense unless Jesus is involved. Okay.
Yeah.
President Trump follows that and says, I hate my enemies. Yeah. Literally, Charlie Kirk loved his enemies. I hate my enemies. That's where we didn't agree. Now, there was an element of it that I know he was in some ways trying to be humorous, but he was also being real. That's how he feels. Here's the issue. And all the things I just listed, the crowd cheered for every single one of them. Yeah. The crowd cheered for call to repentance, the gospel message shared, forgiving the killer, calling for the destruction of enemies, hating the enemies. Yeah. And that was the part of it that I thought, I know people, there has not been an event like that where the gospel was shared, but at the same time, it is that weird connection that creates confusion for the non-believers and those on the other side, because they're looking at this going, which one is it?
Yeah.
And again, that's the tension that I feel as a pastor, that we feel when people are going, you need to connect to this. And I go, that cheapens the message I'm trying to preach on Sunday. Yeah. The message that we're trying to teach on Sunday through our podcasts and individual conversations and our Bible studies and all the stuff that we create and put out to the world is Jesus alone is the hope. Yes. We can cheer that. We can celebrate that. It's when we connect it with something else that it clouds it. It didn't make the message clear. And so I was happy that the gospel message was shared. I genuinely pray that people were saved as a result. But I also am a realist, and I know because I watched their videos, I watched their response, there were a lot of people disturbed, confused, even made fun of Christians and just said that was super weird. And I thought that's what happens when you mix politics and Christianity. It creates that.
Yeah, and we should be reminded of like how the Apostle Paul talks about this. And he talks about this in matters that are far less serious, in the sense of the big one, right? He talks about eating meat sacrificed to idols and drinking wine, right? And he talks about this idea of conscience, right? And how certain Christians were really offended by this, and really bothered by it. And his whole thing is basically taking a posture of humility in selflessness for the sake of other people, right? Yeah. And so he's basically, I don't want to go near anything that might be a stumbling block. Why? Because again, his entire framework of thinking is Christ alone is the answer. Right. And anything that's going to get in the way of Jesus must be removed, right? It's the same reason why we've talked before where Timothy, even though Paul's own convictions about circumcision were like, you don't need to be circumcised to be saved. That was the old covenant thing. But then he goes and he actually has Timothy circumcised so that it won't be a stumbling block to the gospel that they're proclaiming together. And so I think that is such a sobering warning for all of us as Christians to look at our lives and say, what am I championing? What am I celebrating? What am I consuming?
And what rights can I surrender to make this more effective?
So that my witness to Christ is not going to be a stumbling block to anybody.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go here. So if you have any problems with anything I'm about to say, you can email me at alombardi@Tree.Church.
Nice.
Okay. So when you get into Revelation and you start to see like the big three evil there, you got the dragon, the beast, and then the prophet. And then a lot of the language around it is that there's this like, that they're parodies of the Trinity. So what that means is that they look like, they resemble, and has this image of being something good, something beautiful, something beneficial that will bring about the hope and life. Mm-hmm. Some are deceived and led away by this holy untrinity or unholy trinity. I put that on the wrong word. And John even goes to say even some who are the elect who could possibly be led away. Mm-hmm, and so, or the way he words it is it's so tricky that even some who are could potentially be led away is the idea behind it. And so we always get this picture of like the mark of the beast, the Antichrist. It's going to be these hyper wicked, what if it's not that? What if it's this thing that looks almost like Christianity and has the language of Christianity and has the feel of the truth, but isn't? It's off in just a slight way. Yeah. What if that is the danger that John warns us about in Revelation? And I'll be honest, when I look at things like what you just described, I go, man, that looks a lot like that.
Right.
And so I think that is the danger point. When we make compromises in any way to what the gospel is and what Jesus sets as the foundation for our faith, I think we are running the risk of falling into the deceptiveness of the prophet, the beast, and the dragon.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, my dad taught a sermon, and it was on the passage where Jesus said, talking about the end times, where he said, "Many will come in my name and say, I am the Christ." And I remember when I read that as a kid, I thought people are going to come saying that they're the Christ. And my dad said, it's possible what Jesus is actually saying here is many will come and actually say Jesus is the Christ, but then they're going to so distort the rest of the message that they're going to lead people away and it's going to trick them. And he's like, and his fear was that idea that people are going to mix a version of Christianity with something wrong and then deceive people.
Yeah.
And again, that is the danger. And that's why, again, for us as a church, we're not even officially making statements about all the other things. We're just simply saying our passion is always going to be Jesus alone, because Jesus alone is the only safe thing and the only powerful true thing that we have to offer people. Everything else falls short of that. And so I hope when people are listening to this, they're not in any way hearing us throwing shade at someone like a Charlie Kirk or politics, though we are acknowledging there are limits to their effectiveness going the political route. What we're celebrating is that Jesus alone is king.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I'm not calling someone who professed faith in Christ and seemed to have a genuine, I'm not calling them the Antichrist. I'm saying that
we get
system,
it. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That system and that idea, I think, is dangerous.
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts before we conclude?
Jesus alone.
Jesus alone.
Jesus alone.